bingo card had cities in Arkansas considering ways to avoid becoming like Los Angeles. Rogers got a citywide form-based code, Little Rock is updating their downtown master plan, and Fort Smith is replacing its Trails and Greenways plan with a substantial and comprehensive guide to inform decision makers for years to come. Walk, bike, roll, run. This document is a guidebook to shape future decision making when it comes to active transportation in Fort Smith. Active transportation just means getting around without a car. So no matter how you travel, walk, bike, roll, run ought to describe it. Except let's not please ever do this in Fort Smith. Cities have a vested interest in active transportation because as our transportation network increasingly relies on motorized vehicles, the space it takes to fit all of these vehicles spreads everything out until you're spending $10 million for a car line at one school. We have 27 schools in Fort Smith. You got $250 million to roll this out for us here, or should we look into alternatives? Plus, I feel like cars are in a bit of an arms race right now. People buy the biggest car so that they can feel safe when they collide with others, so then everyone else buys a car bigger than that to feel safer than them, so then people buy a bigger car than that, and so on. And as we'll get into the statistics in this document soon, there's a large percentage of our population that simply cannot participate in that arms race, and it's becoming a danger. Science doesn't make crash test dummies for children or bicycles or grannies in wheelchairs. Cities just have to sort of figure out ways to protect their citizens' skulls and limbs. This is going to be a deep dive into the plan. The whole thing is 191 pages, which is way too much for any person to read, so I read it twice so I could give you some of the highlights. First, let's start with what it's not. It's not binding. The board isn't agreeing to spend $100 gazillion on new infrastructure if they pass this plan. What it is a plan that tells the city how to grow so that if we choose to make our city more walkable sometime in the future, where we should physically make those priorities to get the most bang for our buck. It's not short term. Don't get your hopes up on any particular thing in this plan to actually get built within your lifetime. I'm optimistic about a lot of these projects getting done sooner rather than later, but there's so much in here that there's simply not enough time to get it all done, all paid for, all approved. This text is much more of a vibe. It's more like a document of our new principles rather than a 10-year capital outlay. It's not exclusive to cycling. If I refer to a cyclist in this video, just imagine I'm talking about walkers, scooters, and wheelchairs too. If I say bike lane or trail or greenway, imagine I'm just saying multi-use path. All of the projects in this document are meant to serve all vulnerable road users equally. And with that, let's get to it. As an introduction, the text explains the need for a mobility plan. Fort Smith has a shocking 23.5% of its residents living with a disability, which is almost double the national average and can affect the ability to drive a car. Which is also why it's shocking that 9.7% of households in Fort Smith have no vehicle available to them at all. The study also pointed out that in 2022, 206 vulnerable road users were struck by vehicles in Fort Smith, leading to 90 minor injuries, 47 serious injuries, and 11 fatalities. That's 58 families whose lives are changed forever, and in the future, implementing this plan might mean saving 58 families from that hardship every year. The report also goes through some of the demographics of Fort Smith, and it's not just for informational purposes, it's because a lot of traditional cycling infrastructure caters to a demographic that is already fairly well served. The Riverfront Trail is great for hardcore cyclists. The loop at Ben Guerin is great for hardcore cyclists. But this mobility plan wasn't made to give middle-aged men in Lycra more places to ride their $10,000 bikes. It's about getting children to school who might have parents that have to sleep or work during the morning rush, or helping an epileptic person get to the grocery store, or helping a grandmother with poor vision get to church on a Sunday morning. There are thousands and thousands of people in Fort Smith who deserve the dignity of mobility, and this report is a direct commitment to their respect and livelihoods. The next section of the report has some policy recommendations that, in my opinion, are fluff on an already fairly good code that we're just ignoring. These are things like improving the way neighborhoods connect to the existing trail network, which is already a requirement in our city code. But if you look at my own neighborhood, our developer just sort of faked it. Interestingly, the document doesn't have any advice for our ordinance that explains the process for avoiding sidewalk installation. Why do we have this form of bribery codified into law anyway? I'm not a professional planner, but it feels like a violation of the Geneva Convention to let developers get out of sidewalk installation by paying a fee. Because it's not really the developer paying a fee, it's all of us. The document also lays out in the next section how it got made, the structure of the committee that put it together, some details about a survey they offered. Interestingly, that survey found that 95.8% of citizens said that they agreed with the statement, "I support improving bicycling conditions within our community, whether I ride or not," etc., etc., etc. It also has this cool map of what it calls trip generators, which, although unscientific, is accurate that it maps out places where there's a lot of jobs but almost no housing within cycling distance. Downtown Fort Smith, both of our major hospitals, and Central Mall are the bright spots. And the next section is the good stuff. This is where the people who designed this document got to dream big and envision a Fort Smith where every child can walk to school, have outdoor adventures without hovering parents worried about white panel vans, a future with safe and quiet spaces for families to enjoy evening walks in the summer. It calls these dream projects catalyst projects because they could have a huge impact on how people get around town, and putting in a little elbow grease for these projects will hopefully induce demand for more projects in other locations. Plus, it's just fun to ride a bike, walk your dog, or take the family for a walk in beautiful places. The first Catalyst project is rejuvenating B Street. This one is just a no-brainer to me. B Street is already a central cycling corridor for people heading to the river. There's a major high school here, and the road is already so needlessly wide that its maintenance cost is just not worth paying to maintain it as a space for cars. This plan keeps B Street as a one-way street, but shrinks it to one lane. It installs a median, and the new space gets used for a two-way bike route. I love it. The expected cost here is $1.25 million, but this is for 1.7 miles. It actually sounds low to me considering the length. Repaving B Street for cars for the same amount of distance would probably cost somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 times as much. If I dove in further, I imagine I could make a convincing argument that the city loses money by not revitalizing B Street. The second Catalyst project is rejuvenating this alleyway that runs parallel to 10th Street. If you know this part of town, 10th and 11th are the major corridors connecting the north side of town to our central business district, and this plan will pave the alley, put up fencing and lighting, and give a quiet and safe way for vulnerable road users to get from Martin Luther King Jr. Park all the way down to downtown in a stress-free route. If you're wondering what they're going to do about all these intersections, the plan proposes using crosswalks on every road, including the yellow flashes, which you may already be familiar with just nearby on Grand Avenue. And in case you're keeping track, yes, this will connect to the B Street improvement and the May Branch Trail, which is already under construction. So the entire Belgrove neighborhood will have access to the network. It also furthers the city's primary goal of reducing blight. Not to mention that an entire neighborhood will be able to have beers at AJ's Oyster House on a Friday night without having to worry about getting behind the wheel of a car afterwards. A+ Fort Smith. The projected cost for the 10th Street alleyway project is $3.6 million, and I'm pretty sure we can get that funded entirely by grants. Next is what the plan calls the East Side Greenway. This part of town is home to some of the largest amenities in the city, including Walmart, Lowe's, and Mercy Hospital. The Walmart here is the ending route for 2 bus lines, there's a serious issue of unused space around it, and it serves all of the city's easternmost suburbs. For all of these reasons, everyone that comes here pretty much has to use a car. This would help fix that, and at the same time integrate the Chaffee Trail system into the Fort Smith Trail system. The two would connect right about here where the old dog park was. Just the southernmost section of this plan, the route that would get people to Walmart from that trail in Chaffee, is a slam dunk. It royally sucks getting to Walmart from the trail because I have to cross 3 stroads with 5 or 6 minute light timings each just to travel less than 1,000 feet from the southwest side of Phoenix to the northeast side of Rogers. The projected cost for this entire trail system is $3.6 million, but I don't see it really getting done soon or for that cheap. It's a hilly neighborhood with tight squeezes, especially the proposed route on 74th Street behind the hospital. I'm just not sure how you could build a bikeway back there. Next is the Fianna to Ben Garin connector. This plan proposes an entirely new route in the middle of some wilderness near the landfill coming off the south end of the park. The projected cost for this trail is $3.4 million. Like the Eastside Greenway, I'm not confident that we'll see this one get built anytime soon. Fianna serves its purpose of being an isolated neighborhood. I think a lot of people bought their house there because it's so isolated. I don't think that they would really appreciate having this trail. A central tenet of this channel is that wide, stressful roadways are used to divide communities, and it feels like Fianna does this on purpose, and that's by being on the other side of 540 and 271 from the rest of Fort Smith. The next project is called the West Side Bikeway, which at only $1.9 million is one of the more achievable projects. This would essentially connect the west side of town to downtown. If you've ever driven down Towson and counted how many people you've seen walking, it's usually high. And this would give these walkers and cyclists a new corridor parallel to Towson, just one block to the east. This would also link Baptist Health to the trail network, so maybe if a few of their employees and guests could cycle to the hospital, Baptist wouldn't have to waste so much prime real estate on surface parking. In fact, the nearby intersection at Towson and J Street sees around 18,000 cars a day. If just 10% of drivers would cycle to work for only 2 extra days a month, that would be 180 fewer cars every day. The parking for that amount of cars takes up around 5 square kilometers, which is enough space to build a new dog park 1.2 times bigger than the existing dog park we have in Chaffee. Finally is the jewel in the crown, the project that would really put Fort Smith on people's radars. And it's also the most expensive project in the plan, but that's because it's bold and ambitious. Fort Smith calls it the Bass Reeves Legacy Loop. This loop would circle multiple neighborhoods, putting 9 or more of our schools within safe cycling distance of a reliable active transport network. And not just schools, the loop would connect multiple apartment complexes, major employers, amenities, and it could serve recreational purposes as well. The total projected cost of this project is $25 million, which is a deliberate amount because the city wants to build this with funds from federal infrastructure grants, specifically the RAISE grant, and that grant caps out at $25 million. So the city applied for this grant in 2024, didn't get it, but the feedback from the feds was basically, looks like there's a lot of good ideas here, we're not going to give it to you this time, but definitely try again. So it will probably be at least a year before we have any more updates on the Bass Reeves Legacy Loop. Oh, and if you're wondering if bicycle infrastructure isn't getting this grant, what is? More highway, of course.
Boo! Boo! Boo!
Why do you do this?
Because you had love in your hands and you gave it up.
After the catalytic projects, the document spends several pages showing recommended projects that would theoretically come piecemeal. They're important, but separate from the 6 catalytic projects because they're less expensive, less impressive. We're just talking about basic things like where to paint crosswalks or build sidewalks. We don't really need to go into too much detail, it's just standard run-of-the-mill network building that really should have been done when this was all built out. For me, living in Chaffee, I would most utilize the proposed sidewalk on Zero Street. It would be awesome to watch the sunrise from McClure Amphitheater, then cycle over to that new coffee place by Jim's Razorback Pizza for coffee, then over to Clubhouse Kitchen for their famous Saturday morning brunch buffet. Zero's a state highway though, so some of this is wishful thinking. If only I knew someone who lives in Arkansas. The plan also calls to put in a combination of multi-use paths and sidewalks along Hendricks and Cliff Drive, which are some of the more beautiful stretches of road where 9.7% of us simply aren't allowed to go. And there's also a proposal for a pedestrian bridge over the river leading to Van Buren, which, if you know me, I've only been to Van Buren a handful of times. You can't get over there with a bicycle. The rest of the document is more technical and geared towards the people who would actually be responsible for building it out. It goes over different things like types of pavement, proper turning radii, height clearances, how to install proper bicycle parking, and finally, different types of funding to pay for these types of developments. With all that being said, there are some more highlights in this report that stuck out to me that I'd really like to point out. First is this sidewalk map. If you've complained about a lack of sidewalks in your neighborhood, this map is your vindication. We're missing a lot of sidewalks in Fort Smith, and we're missing them bad. I'm so glad they included this map because it was really eye-opening to me, and I hope you feel the same way. Next is this really cool graphic of what the study estimates to be the population of the USA and our attitudes towards cycling. I can agree that a solid 37% of people will never consider ever giving up their emotional support vehicle, even for one trip, which is fine. That number does sound about accurate to me. For me, I would guess I would put myself here in the green category. I've been known to dart in and out of traffic on Garrison a bit, but for the most part, I stick to sidewalk these days, and I don't ride at all on Rogers or Grand if I can help it. For Fort Smith at least, I don't think 7% is an accurate number for strong and fearless. These people definitely exist here, but I would imagine they're less than 2% of the population. Page 128 has this really cool picture of a mid-block intersection as recommended by the Federal Highway Administration. I'm not a fan of this particular design where the bikes are forced to come to a complete stop but the cars aren't, but in general, I vastly prefer mid-block intersections over crossing at normal roadway intersections. At the roadway intersection, vehicles that are turning right are always looking to the left, not towards the crosswalk. Vehicles turning left are always looking forward, not towards the crosswalk. And 99% of cars going in either direction are just on the lookout for other cars. They're never looking for bicycles. Next, page 122 mentions that multi-use paths should have a design speed of up to 30 miles per hour. And if you don't know what design speed is, it's very similar to the proposed natural speed limit I mentioned in this other video. But in my opinion, 30 miles per hour is way too fast for any mixed-use trail. It's appropriate for a fast cycle track, but nobody likes to be out walking their dog and have someone zip by, regardless of vehicle type, at 30 miles an hour. I think 15 to 18 miles per hour is safe and fine, and if someone wants to go 30, they should be on a roadway, which is legal in Arkansas. We have a couple of 30 mile per hour downhills like this in Chaffee, and just like roadways designed to be faster than the speed limit, whoever maintains the trails had to put up this speed limit sign. If you want people to ride at 18 miles per hour, you should design an 18 mile per hour trail. Important to me is a recommendation to institute a tactical urbanism policy. I'm super excited for this. If you don't know what tactical urbanism is, it's basically letting the citizens take control over their own infrastructure. This can be anything from planting trees, planting bushes, flowers, putting up umbrellas for shade, putting in your own directional signage, or even doing things like painting the road. Asphalt art is specifically something that would be super compatible with the rest of this plan. I can just imagine the students at an elementary school, maybe each grade level gets a 5-foot section of wall or trail that they get to design or paint, and let every child have their input. Maybe a little girl wants to do a rabbit, someone else wants to do a star, whatever, and it would be a way for every child to leave their mark on Fort Smith. Not only would it beautify our new trails, but maybe someday, 10, 15, 20 years from now, someone's left home for college, maybe they're coming back for Thanksgiving, taking a walk with a new sweetheart, and they get to point out that star or grizzly or rainbow or whatever that they painted all those years ago and it's still there. Finally, when it's time to get down to nuts and bolts, we need to think about the long-term maintenance cost for everything we build. We can't just build a trail because somebody drew a line on the map. The document estimates multi-use trails to cost $4,000 to $5,000 a year to maintain, which is way cheaper than roadways, but it's still expensive. With that being said, I'm also extremely skeptical of this amount. Where's it coming from? Much of our existing trail infrastructure is in the middle of the woods and probably does cost that much to maintain, sure. But building new trails next to streets that are already being maintained, I wonder how much of this cost is related to landscaping and debris cleanup that we're already doing and already paying for, so adding a new trail doesn't increase the maintenance cost at all. We probably need to get a lot of clarification on what goes into this number so we can plan more accurately. Okay, that's it. 4,000 words paraphrasing someone else's work. A lot of people put a lot of love into this document, and they all deserve all the attention and praise that I can give. I was already optimistic about Fort Smith's future, and this will make it even better.